morning, everyone. Today we are going to take a look at the ISTEP Math Applied Skills section. This is the test that we will be giving starting February 27th through March 10th. The Applied Skills test is a long answer test. That means that instead of choosing an answer and filling in a bubble, you have to write out the answer yourselves. So these questions are scored in this way that you see on the screen. There are two types of questions. Constructed response questions receive 2 points for content, that's what you put in your answer, and process, that's how you go about finding your answer. The extended response questions are a little bit longer. They usually have 3 parts. Content is worth 3 points, and process is worth another 3 points. So the constructed response questions, the shorter questions that are usually 1 or 2 parts, those are worth a total of 4 points each, while the longer extended response questions are worth a total of 6. So this rubric is a little bit blurry, but you can kind of see where the points are coming from. The points for content, a score of 0 shows limited or no understanding of the mathematical concepts of the task. A score of 1 indicates a partial understanding of the mathematical concepts in the task, but the response contains errors in the content-related work. So maybe you started to do the math correctly, but you made a mistake in the multiplication or in the addition. You knew what you were supposed to do, but you didn't calculate it correctly. A score of 2 for content indicates that you really understand the math concepts embodied in the task. This response shows content-related work that is executed correctly and completely. You did everything that you needed to do, and you calculated it correctly. For process, a score of 0 shows limited or no understanding of the processes related to the task. A score of 1 indicates a partial understanding of the processes related to the task. The response contains 1 or more of the following errors. The response might show a strategy that contains minor errors, or it might identify some of the important elements of the problem and show a general understanding of the relationships, or it might contain errors related to the precision of work. A score of 2 indicates a thorough understanding of the processes related to the task. The response shows an appropriate strategy to solve the problem, and the strategy is executed correctly and completely. It identifies all of the important elements of the problem and shows a complete understanding of the relationships among them. It also attends to precision in explanations and the overall body of work. So, in order to score 2 in process, you have to show an appropriate strategy, such as a formula or an equation, and you need to work it out correctly and completely. Now, there are some important things to know. If you give a correct answer, but you only give the answer and show no work, you can receive only 1 point each for content and process. That means that you lose half of your points on a constructed response if you do not show your work. Also, you can receive full credit for process even if you don't do the math correctly, as long as your formula or equation is set up correctly. So if you show that you knew how to work the problem, but you made a mistake in your calculations, you can still receive full points for process. You would only lose a point in content because you didn't solve correctly. And here it says that a computation error deducts a point, only one, from either content or process depending on where the error occurs. So multiple computation errors, if you make multiple mistakes on actually doing the math, you may lose points from content, process, or both, depending on what kind of errors and the number of errors that you make. So let's take a look now at the extended response rubric. Remember, the extended response is worth a total of 6 points, 3 points for content, and another 3 points for process. So here we have the rubric, and it shows that a score of 0 for content indicates no understanding of the mathematical concepts embodied in the task. That means you had no idea how to actually compute the math and solve the problem. A score of 1 shows a limited understanding, and it contains major mistakes in the actual math work. A score of 2 shows a partial understanding of the math concepts, but it might contain some minor mistakes in the actual mathematical work. A score of 3 in content indicates a thorough understanding. This means that you showed that you really understand how to solve this problem. It shows content-related work executed correctly and completely. You did all of the math, and you did it right. Now, under the process rubric, a score of 0 indicates no understanding of the processes related to the task. A score of 1 indicates a limited understanding of the processes related to the task, but it contains one or more of the following errors. It might show a strategy that contains major mistakes, or it might show a limited understanding of the relationships among the elements of the problem, or there might be major mistakes related to the precision of work. A score of 2 indicates a partial understanding of the processes. So you got off to a good start, but you might have one or more of the following mistakes. So the strategy that you used might contain some minor mistakes. Or you might have identified the important elements and shown a general understanding, but you weren't quite precise enough. Or it might contain minor errors related to the precision of work. A score of 3, again, means that you really knew what you were doing. You have a thorough understanding of the processes related to the task. The response shows an appropriate strategy to solve the problem, and the strategy is executed correctly and completely. That means that you either gave a correct formula, or you set up a correct equation, you explained all of the variables, and then you were able to solve the equation correctly. You were able to identify all of the important parts of the problem, and you showed that you really understood how all of those parts fit together. You were also very precise in your explanation and the way you worked the problem overall. Once again, there are some notes. You will lose at least 1 point for content and 1 point for process if you show no work. Correct answers only on all parts of the problem with no work shown will receive a maximum of 2 points. 2 points in content and 2 points in process. Once again, you can still receive a 3 in process even if you've made an error in your computations in the way you calculated. So maybe you added wrong or you divided wrong. You can still get a 3 in process as long as you followed an appropriate strategy. So you wrote out an appropriate equation and you worked through it. If you made a simple addition or subtraction error, you can still get full points for process. You will only lose points for content. A computation error deducts points either from content or from process, depending on where the error occurs. This is just like the constructed response questions. It depends exactly where you make your math errors. So now let's actually take a look at a sample constructed response grade 10 math question. So the content standard says represent real-world problems using quadratic equations in 1 or 2 variables and solve such problems with and without technology. Interpret the solution and determine whether it is reasonable. So we're going to be working on modeling with mathematics. This is worth a total of 4 points. It's constructed response, so 2 points total for content and 2 points for process. So the question says a rectangle with an area of 104 square inches has a width that is 5 inches less than its length. So part A says write an equation representing the area of the triangle. Use x to represent the length of the triangle. Solve your equation for all values of x. Show all work. And part B, use your solution to the equation to identify the width and length of the rectangle. Explain how you determined which value or values of x to use. Show all work. So this question is asking us to first write an equation telling us how we could find the length and width of this rectangle. And part B asks us to use that solution to actually identify. So go ahead and solve for the width and length of the rectangle. And we need to explain how we decided what values to use for the length. So, here is an exemplary response. This is a good response. This is an example of what your response should look like. So for part A, you might say area equals length times width. That's a formula that you should all know, the formula for finding area. So let x equal length. Width would be x minus 5 because the question told us that the width was 5 less than the length. So the area equals x times x minus 5. And we know that the area was 104, so we can fill in 104 for area. 104 equals x times x minus 5. And for part B, we might answer the length is 13 inches and the width is 8 inches. So we can continue to look at this equation. 104 equals x times x minus 5. And we can then go ahead and work down through this quadratic equation to get to x equals negative 8 or 13. And so then the answer to the second part, the student says that a distance or length cannot be negative. You can't have negative inches. It just doesn't work. So the result, x equals negative 8, can be excluded. We know we can't use a negative number for inches. So the length must equal 13. Therefore, the width must equal 8. Or you might be able to find some other valid process or reasoning to get to the answers of length equals 13, width equals 8. Now let's look at a sample extended response question. Once again, this is grade 10, Algebra 1. The standard says construct a function to model a linear relationship between two quantities given a verbal description, table of values, or graph. Recognize in the formula y equals mx plus b that m is the slope, or the rate of change, and b is the y-intercept of the graph. And describe the meaning of each in the context of a problem. So we'll be looking at 3 different processes. We need to be able to reason abstractly and quantitatively. We need to construct viable arguments and critique the reasoning of others, and we need to be able to model with mathematics. This is a 6-point problem. That means you get a total of 3 points for content and 3 points for process. The value of the function is 80, or if you created an incorrect linear function, you might have gotten a different number. But that number, in part C, it says that this represents because someone will not rent a car for 0 days, the value when D equals 0 represents the costs or fees that all customers pay regardless of the number of days that they rent the car. So if you rent a car for 3 days, you pay the $35 daily fee, plus you pay a total of $80 in fees. Those $80 remain the same no matter how many days you're renting the car. Now, there are some questions that a lot of people ask about this test. One of those questions is, what happens if we write outside of the given lines? So on your paper and pencil test, you will be given space to write. If you continue outside of those lines but still within the center of the page, as long as the test scorer can tell what question you are answering, they will continue to read your answer. But if you write in the margins, that is the outside space at the top, bottom, right, or left of your of your page, the scorers are not allowed to read or use that work when they give you a score for your answer. So if you look at this screen as an example, anything that you write in the blue areas would not count towards your scored test. It would need to be within the white section of the page. Also, scoring multiple part items. It's important for you to know that if you mess up, just like we saw on this last example, if you mess up when creating the function, as long as you solve it correctly, you can still get points in part B and C, as long as you came up with an answer that's correct based on the function that you gave in part A. Also, lastly, the spelling and the grammar. And this is very important, I think, for you guys especially to know. You are not being graded on your grammar and your spelling on this math test. That means that as long as the grader can understand what you are trying to say, it does not matter if every word is spelled perfectly. It does not matter if your grammar is absolutely perfect. As long as the grader can see what you are trying to say, you can still get full points. So it's very important, even though it's frustrating and even though it's a lot of hard work, I need you guys to go ahead and try to write out your explanations as much as possible. It does not have to be perfect, but tell us as much as you can about how you would solve the problem and what those solutions mean in the real world. So